Hello, everybody. You may recognize this wonderful guest, a dear, dear, dear old friend of mine and supreme colleague, Dr. Lindsay Berkson.
Hi there, David. It's so great to be here and hang with you this morning with my morning cup of joe.
And mine. and we've only got about 32 hours of questions, but we got 1 hour to do it in. And of course, any of you have questions, you can post them in the chat, but there's certain subjects I really want to take advantage of Dr. Berkson being here.
I have no idea what he's going to ask. So this is going to be an exciting dialogue, conversation.
So I want to ask you a simple question. What's the cause of cancer?
That is, so everyone's always been theorizing the cause of cancer, and they usually put it in 3 steps. Something causes it, initiation, and then something worsens it, progression, and then something makes it more fatal, where it travels throughout the body in potentially fatal metastases. But what's that initiative action? What damages DNA to take a cell that has a normal life cycle? It lives and then it dies, but that cell becomes immortal. So cancer is growth out of control. We often call it hyperproliferation. And everyone's been frightened that estrogen was a trigger for growth out of control. But what we've been learning over the last few years, especially since the 19-year reanalysis of the Women's Health Initiative, which came out December 19th, 2019, kind of a double entendre there, we learned that estrogen actually helps control a healthier growth cycle. So I don't know if that was where you were wanting to go with that.
And I wanted to look at it globally because, of course, this question is here to address the woman's greatest fear that has not been antidoted. This false information came out in 2002 that estrogen could cause breast cancer, for example. It was false. It was false when it came out. It was false in the study. There was no statistical increase that was significant in the study, which means you don't publish the study. You don't stop the study. It was statistically insignificant for the Prempro part, the Premarin plus Provera. But the scare just exploded onto the world public and scared women and providers alike.
More in the United States. We are an aging nation. In about another 10 years, most American citizens will be over 65. There'll be more older people than there'll be younger people. So the institutions got together with the government and said, we don't want to topple Medicare. And women live longer than men. So let's create a series of observational and also of randomized trials looking at women every which way so we could protect our social security and our women. And they named that the Women's Health Initiative. And some of the first tests they decided to do were hormones, because for years up until then, about almost 20 million American women were on hormones, promised to be feminine forever. Around the world, women have been given hormones. So they thought, we'll just prove with a randomized trial what we already clinically have observed is when you give people these powerful signaling molecules, they tend to slow down aging. No one becomes immortal, but they tend to have a better time as they age and compress comorbidities later in the future. And it turned out to be a statistical fiasco. They stopped it prematurely with scary headlines, but really savvy people said, don't listen to this data. So Leon Spiroff is the professor of gynecology that's written the books that most gynecologists are weaned on. He wrote letters saying, don't listen to this. Clinically, we've seen giving hormones to women doesn't cause cancer and protects against heart disease. And then HOODIS, over the years, I actually spent 3 years of my life reanalyzing the entire Women's Health Initiative that came out with the fateful wrong news in July 2002. And I wrote a book on it called Safe Hormones, Smart Women, trying to encourage women that something was wrong with these scary headlines. And the rest of the world didn't stop using hormones. They said, those Americans, they're crazy. A small little randomized trial, and they're going to give up what we've seen works clinically for decades. Forget it. In fact, at this time, socialized medicine countries track what keeps their citizens healthier longer and doesn't lean on their finances. So who gives hormones for free now because they see the benefit? All the Nordic countries, Iceland, Greenland, Finland, Norway, also Italy, Great Britain jumped on the bandwagon last year, Scotland, Wales. We're talking a lot of countries have seen that people fare better. They have lived longer, they have less cognitive decline and less cancers if they're on hormone replacement. So they're all offering it for free if people want it for free, because they see that it serves them to save money on the other end if they offer it for free around 50 years old to men and women on this end. Our government went nutty over this little randomized trial. And as you know, in 2018, a number of years later, when no one in the United States, everyone's fearful of hormones, HUDIS published a study showing that the whole methodology of the Women's Health Initiative was so fatally flawed. They had forgotten to, there's an experimental arm where you give the women hormones and a control arm where you give them placebo. They had forgot to ask in the placebo arm if women had ever been on estrogen before, which now we learned protects you against breast cancer. So it made this group look like they had less breast cancer, and it made the people taking hormones look like they had more. The bottom line was the whole entire methodology that everyone is now frightened of estrogen about had a huge methodologic flaw. And then the year later, 12 prestigious cancer institutions published the 19-year reanalysis, and they said, we made a terrible mistake. If you really look back with hindsight, and hindsight's 2020, women who take estrogen, even for a short period of time, have a reduced risk of getting breast cancer by almost 25%. I think it was 23%, but in the Bethesda study that came out this week, looking at 7 million women on Medicare, the reduction of 3 cancers, breast, ovary, and uterine cancer, were 30%. And they also found that if you did get breast cancer and you'd been on hormones or were on hormones, you had less risk of dying from it. Reduction of fatality by 44%. No, nothing else has ever shown that protection. In other words, estrogen protects. And I just have one question, because I know you're going to want to say something. My question that I always say, David, is why would Mother Nature make the very hormones that drive Homo sapiens, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, these sex steroids, drive reproduction, they drive the human race, they drive intimacy and connection? Why would those hormones, why would Mother Nature make them cancer-causing, carcinogenic? Makes no sense to me.
That's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful explanation. And, to distill it down to a couple things, women need to know that the actual science is that, yeah, we're at risk for cancer. We're at risk for thousands of diagnoses. But women who are treated with hormones are at less
risk.
Breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke than women who are not treated with hormones.
This is so important to download or Vulcan Mind Meld, because in the cultural consciousness, women think and physicians think estrogen drives cancer. They don't realize it protects against cancer. And this is now based on replicated science. That's the hallmark of science. If you could replicate it, it's replicated. There's no doubt about it now. The University of Arizona published their insurance study a few months ago, because everyone's worried now about cognitive decline. Will you outlive your wits? That's a big issue. And they took a look at 400,000 insurance patients and tracked to see who got Alzheimer's disease, who didn't, and what were the confounding variables, like what was going on in their life. And they discovered that if women took hormones, they had a significant reduction. If they took bioidentical hormones, they had almost an 80% reduction in getting Alzheimer's disease, because hormones run the brain. That's why my last book was called Sexy Brain, because sex steroid hormones rule the brain. If you want to keep your brain intact, you want to keep your hormones intact. They found that non-bioidentical hormones still protect. And what we've learned in the last few years is any hormone is better than no hormone, but it was a little less protection than bioidentical. There's so much data coming out. It's like a railroad train of data coming out showing that hormones protect against cancer, protect your brain, protect your heart. But for the last 20 years, everyone's been so frightened, at least in the United States, that they've stopped teaching it in med schools and naturopathic schools and osteopathic schools and chiropractic schools. So nobody knows how to test and treat. And you're left with a little bit of awareness starting to grow, but you don't know which practitioner to go to get the proper answers and help.
Yeah. And just as an addendum, the original study committee that published the Women's Health Initiative retracted their statement that there was increased risk in 2018. They published an article in the original journal, the original study committee, that after 18 years of follow-up, there is no increased risk of breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke. They retracted their own initial statements that there was.
And that didn't make headline news because America is run on fear. The media is run on fear and run on and paid for by a big pharma. So the problem is people have gotten used to being run by fear, and fearful headlines sell and non-fearful headlines don't. So the original wrong fearful headlines got into doctors and patients' consciousness, but the retraction and the real science that came forward, none of that made headline news. And even doctors don't know it. You know, I hear from patients all the time. I heard you talk, I read your book. I went and asked my doctor, who's well-intentioned, I'm sure. I asked my general doc or my gynecologist if I am a candidate for hormones, and I'm told they don't believe in hormones. Well, hormones aren't Judaism or Muslimism. They're not a religion. The problem is that people are down on what they're not up on. And the majority of doctors today do not know yet this new science. They don't know it. So most of the time, if you ask your doc, you think a gynecologist and a urologist should know hormones. You think that that's the people that should know hormones, but it's not. It's shocking to really swallow that reality.
It is a shocker. Once a week on our Facebook Live, a woman says, I went to my doctor and asked about hormones. And just last week, we heard the doctor say, well, we're not going to give you hormones because estrogen promotes breast cancer.
Of course, I'm taking it a little further. I had breast cancer 30 years ago. I've been on hormone replacement now for about 26 years. You know, I'm going to be 74 in a few months. And whenever I go in to see my breast cancer surgeon, because they have the best palpating fingers, so I like to get palpated because I don't really want to get a mammogram every single year. I go in and she goes, you look better than any other breast cancer patient I have your age. You got to get off hormones. Of course, the surgeon doesn't know anything about hormones. And every year, she's about 20 years younger than me. She's aging. She looks like my grandmother. And everyone's always asking me, what do you do to have this energy and this kind of lubed brain and these looks at this age when most of my colleagues are getting gray and shuffling? Not everybody, but a lot. And one of the biggest tools, not the only tool, is getting hormones to the right dosage so that your tissues keep signaling and keep running you and keep you going.
And maybe as a final addendum to this, the science is this around women who've had breast cancer. And they're at an increased relative risk for recurrence of that breast cancer than a woman is in getting breast cancer brand new. But women who are treated with hormones are at less risk for recurrence of that breast cancer than women who go untreated. Women who've had that breast cancer properly treated, are at less risk of recurrence than women if they're treated with hormones.
If you read the science at the end of the conclusions, that's what's starting to be said. Women with high-risk women have been denied hormones when the science doesn't prove it. The last year, I've been going around the country. I just lectured at David Brownstein's International College of Integrative Medicine. I lectured for an hour and a half showing the 26 studies, many of them at American prestigious institutions, a few of them at outlying foreign institutions like in Slovenia. But women with breast cancer have been tracked from 2 to 26 years, even estrogen positive breast cancer. They've been given estrogen, they're tracked compared to matched cohorts. That women who had breast cancer that are allowed to go on hormones from a forward-thinking doctor in a study have less recurrence. This is the theme, less recurrence, and if you do get it, less death if you do get it. Over and over, not one study showed a worsening. I was just invited to teach the physicians at 2 cancer centers, one in Tijuana and one in the Caribbean, to show and go over the science, the sound science. There's quite a body of it showing the protection of women. And some of these studies were done at MD Anderson or University of Wisconsin, yet none of that is reflected in the standard of care. The standard of care says if you're a high-risk woman, no hormones. But that standard of care is not reflecting the science. Then the patient is denied the treatment, and we're kind of in this mess. And also the doctor gets worried, understandably, of being sued if the standard of care isn't giving hormones. You can't guarantee someone isn't going to get a nasty diagnosis. So unfortunately, once again, fear. We run by fear, and then we miss out on having a higher quality life.
Oh, there's so much wonderful things to be known about this and understood. And the bottom line is ovarian hormones replenished properly reduce risk of breast cancer, heart attack, cognitive decline, osteoporosis. There's so many debilitating things that can happen as we age that are alleviated. And it comes all the way down to very fewer people in assisted living facilities, fewer women in nursing homes. It's a big deal. Fewer women who keep their vaginas and have active vaginas, keep their bladders, don't get incontinent. The list of the benefits of taking hormones and the near certainty of trouble if you don't. Loss of muscle, loss of bone, loss of arteries, loss of thinking, cognition. These things are very important.
I've got a really cool way of downloading this rapidly. So I had the honor, I wrote one of the very first breakthrough books on endocrine disrupting compounds that our toxic world is making our own hormones difficult to function optimally at the same time that we're misunderstanding hormones in general. And then I was invited, based on that book, to be a distinguished scholar at an estrogen think tank. So I worked at Tulane Med School for almost 10 years, and I met and worked side by side with the gentleman who discovered the first estrogen receptors, Elwood Jensen, Unaki Gustafsson. So I have this unusual academic background of working at a think tank with the scientists who were looking at hormones, discovering how they work, and how our polluted environment really is assaulting our hormones. So we live in an adversarial planet against our hormones just as a given. So think of it as this. I love that movie with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, You've Got Mail. So hormones are the most powerful signaling molecules in the body. One cell sends a message to another cell, it's got mail. And that cellular mail tells your cells what to do. So estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and even transmembranous hormones like oxytocin, they send signals to your brain to think, to your vocal cords to be able to project and sound young, to your kidneys to keep filtering and be healthy, to your cardiomyocytes in your heart. It's cellular email that keeps you young. And you can think of aging as basically the freezing up of your email, which then causes a lot of inflammation. That recipe, loss of email and inflammation, accelerates aging. If you add hormones back in the mix, you turn the email back on, you turn physiologic messages back on, your cells start being told what to do, you can gently, somewhat reverse aging. You can even initiate hormones in a 90-year-old woman. This whole idea of the estrogen window, this arrogant, inaccurate idea. Oh boy, I interviewed that guy on my show, and then I chose not to publish it because it was so arrogant and so erroneous. You can initiate hormones at any age, but it takes a savvy doctor because you're waking up your little satellite dishes, the receptors that receive those signals. But you've got male. You want to keep getting male, and that will slow down aging, but it's misunderstood. And that's why it's great to have shows like this. And I appreciate all the elbow grease and the wisdom that you're working hard to share, David. You're amazing.
And you mentioned a topic that I'd like you to elaborate on.
I just want to say you were one of my doctors when I had breast cancer 30 years ago. That's how we first met.
I remember
just had to throw that in.
I can picture that IV room and you sitting there and us talking.
You got out the IVs, and then you had the what do you call them? The music bowl?
Yes, right.
So you gave the right vibration to the IV. Oh, you were like amazing. I thought, how lucky am I to bump into this physician? Wow. Thank you for all you've done for my life, David. I appreciate it.
You mentioned a topic there that I'd like you to elaborate.
Someone said, who's the guest speaker? They don't know who I am.
This is Dr. Devaki Lindsay Bergson. She is a world expert in the realm of hormones, as well as many other subjects. And it's an honor because we've known each other for 30 years.
Yeah.
And who do I turn to when I want some real science, when I want some real practical facts and have fun in the process? Dr. Bergson. So that's why we're on today, because we do this periodically. And Devaki, would you talk about that whole subject of toxicity? You know, we like to think that these poisons are invisible and they don't do anything to us, but it's not true. And you're a world expert on this. Please talk to us about toxicity and what a woman could do about it.
So we're just beginning to understand the power of these signaling molecules, that hormones aren't just about sexy and reproductive things. They run everything, especially when they're being set up in the womb. So whatever a mom is exposed to sets up the hormonal signaling system of her developing fetus for how its brain is going to work, how its satiety centers are going to work, how its blood sugar maintenance is going to work. Hormones are signaling molecules that run everything. And at the same time, on planet Earth, we want to have modern conveniences. So we now have lots of chemicals. We have pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, volatile organic pollutants, phthalates. What we've discovered, unfortunately, is there is a shadow side of technology. And many of these chemicals can assault and cause hormone systems not to work, especially in the egg and the sperm, the placenta, breast milk, right early on when life is beginning to set up its blueprint. So I realized early on that our chemicals were powerful. I had done a rotation in integrative medicine with Dr. Wright, who's considered the pioneer of bioidentical hormones, in about 1977. Alan Gaby was a student, and we both were learning. And Jonathan said, throughout your career, realize the importance of hormones. Whenever you look at a patient, always run hormones, because hormones are powerful signaling molecules. So early on in my career, I've been running hormones and looking at hormones for almost 50 years now. I mean, the whole, maybe 40 some years. And so if hormones are this powerful, but our toxic, dirty planet can assault them, and that's an issue, what do we do about it? And a lot of doctors, in fact, today are saying it's harder and harder to get women on the proper dose of hormones, because the receptors, so a hormone delivers a signal to a satellite dish called a receptor. But if you have chemicals sitting on that receptor, even if the way you test the level of the hormone looks great, you don't know about the functionality of the receptor. So I worked with the two scientists who discovered the first receptors, and Elwood Jensen and Yanaki Gustafsson. They would say hormone health is about receptor functionality, and doctors just run it. The debate is always saliva, blood, urine. That doesn't tell you whether the hormone can get in and signal. That's a whole nother tapestry of how hormones work. So actually, I decided, since we have more and more women that are difficult to get their hormones into the receptor, and I worked with the scientists who discovered the receptors based on that, I pitched my idea to Biotics, which is a very high-level doctor's line, and I created a product called Receptor Detox that clears off the receptors. It's ideal right before you initiate hormone replacement, or you can take it at any time, even if you're on it, or even if you're not on hormone replacement, to make your own hormones work better. And then I created a product to keep your hormones level throughout the day, and all the botanicals that cause controlled growth, which we started the show with talking that cancer is growth out of control. Because I had cancer, I had multiple cancers when I was younger, because my mother was given a drug when she was pregnant with me. I had to figure out how to stop getting cancers. Cancer is growth out of control. So over the years, I discovered many botanicals that cause controlled growth. So I made my remission my mission. So I put all this in these products. I designed Metagenics first femline in the 80s, and I had a lot of basis of formulation information then. And these two new products, the testimonials and what's happening with them are quite extraordinary. And if people go to my website, drlindseyberkson.com, there's a link to get right to these products. I think it's under the store and you can get them. I don't know if you want me to go on and on about them, but I was so excited. No one else has ever created like a daily product to keep our hormones healthy, because we haven't really grasped the reality of how toxic the environment is. And it doesn't allow that email to really be happening. We have planetary email freeze because of all the pollutants. And this is a reality. It is a reality, especially prior to conception and during pregnancy and lactation, because a mother downloads 80% of the chemicals she's been exposed to in breast milk to her baby. You still want to breastfeed, but you'd really like to have less of those chemicals in there when you're doing it. So honestly, I don't know why gynecologists don't jump on the concept of the need for green pregnancy. Why do we have so many kids with ADHD, so many kids with on the spectrum, so many kids with emotional issues? A lot of that is starting with the sperm and the egg and the placenta being polluted. We are seeing this, and gender bending. So I decided to create the very first products to try and protect hormones all throughout the life cycle. They're to be taken like a one-a-day multi, but for your hormones. And we're kind of seeing miraculous things happen that I didn't even plan on once you start getting those receptors that receive those emails working better.
It's so critical. And I like to think of hormones as being so biologically active, but in order to act, they have to interlace with receptor sites right in there in the cell nucleus. And they're not the only thing that that receptor site can receive. Wouldn't you know, these petrochemicals, for example, that are the basis for killing insects, herbicides, pesticides, how strong does a chemical have to be to kill an insect? It's very, very strong. Wouldn't you know that they happen to be have an affinity for estrogen receptor sites, for hormone receptor sites, these chemicals? I mean, of all the things in the world, they're even named xenoestrogens. They're things that will bind up an estrogen receptor site that don't belong there. They're toxic chemicals from the environment. And detoxification becomes part of the tools.
Detox has to move mainstream. It's got to move mainstream, or humanity's going to really be in trouble. It's really... So I have a book, if you want the basics of endocrine disruption, I have a book called Hormone Deception, which gives you the science, but it makes it very digestible. It's really a must read for this, but realize that hormones deliver the signals of life. Because of that, the receptors were made very malleable, like very wiry and malleable, because it's so important to receive these signals to tell your brain, your heart, your kidney what to do. But because they're malleable, many other chemicals can enter in and create havoc. That's why you need some, and there's no way of living in a Seinfeld bubble boy existence. We can't completely protect ourselves. That's why today we need some regular way of cleaning off the receptors and keeping our hormones healthy. That's why I decided to create these products, Receptor, Detox and Hormone Balance and Protect. And that's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to be like an infomercial here.
Well, it's so crucial. And, you know, every functional medicine physician or any given individual who cares about their health, you run into the crucial importance of good nutrition And part of good nutrition is you eat clean stuff and you make sure that you're not eating and drinking toxic chemicals. You got to go organic, basically. And you got to clean your house of all these toxic chemicals so you live cheaper. And so you've got to clean up your environment that you're exposed to. And at the same time, there's some powerful detoxic, basic naturopathic ways to address detoxifying the liver, for example, and liver cleanses. And then this daily supplement that will facilitate detoxification of these estrogen and these receptor sites, these hormone receptor sites. So I can't emphasize it enough myself, Devaki. It's a real blessing. And would you repeat?
In Hormone Deception, the last third of the book is I take you through where you get most of your exposure and show you how to decrease your exposure. So I take you through your house, your supermarket cart, and your office. So I show you where most of that exposure is. You want to know, where do I get most of this stuff? And the good news and the bad news is most of our exposure is in our home, shockingly, but there's tricks to reduce that exposure, which really make a significant difference. And it's based on replicatable science. So Hormone Deception shows you the idea of what endocrine disruption is. But then the last third of the book is all about figuring out how to, without making yourself crazy, doing 1 or 2 things a week or a month. So you go slowly, you don't make yourself have to be crazy, but you slowly and strategically protect yourself and your family by learning how to decrease exposure. And also, if you want, using these products are now a must, I think, to keep our hormones signaling for as long as we can, so that we can live younger and longer as long as we can.
How about men taking these 2 supplement products that you mentioned?
It's definitely for both men and women. I remember Jonathan, I would say to him, so you mainly do male hormones now. Is there a trick to what you're doing? And we don't think that pollutants are attacking progesterone or attacking androgens, male hormones, or attacking oxytocin, the feel-good hormone. There's theories that we have so much trigger anger because our feel-good hormone receptor is being attacked by pollutants. It's not just estrogen. Many of us have thought of these things as xenoestrogens, but they can attack the vitamin A receptor. Every single binding domain needs a retinoic acid molecule. So all of vitamin D is under attack. Many, many hormones are under attack, which is why this would be important. What was the question? I lost my path there.
Yeah. The number 1 question I want to post in the chat is your website name, so women and men can go to the website and download some of the books that you have.
And so also, Dr. Lindsay Berkson, can I type this in here? How do
yes.
I
don't type it into the chat, or I can type it in.
Chat. I don't see where I can, let's see. There it is. I see it. Dr. Lindsay Berkson. I see. I think I got it right. Yeah. So, I lecture all over the world right now. And for the last so many years, just in the last month, I lectured in Charlotte, then in Minnesota, then in San Francisco. And I'm lecturing on everything you ever want to know about hormones and the nutrition that they lean on. But when people find out my age, that becomes the most important question. They want to know how, because they're all young docs, and they want to know, how do I get to be like you when I'm almost in my mid 70s? What do I do? What do I do? And part of that is the appreciation that hormones are the most powerful signaling molecules. You got to caretake them. You got to work with someone that gets them at the right dose. You got to clean off those receptors so that they can signal. But it can be a journey. There's many nuances to hormone healthcare in today's toxic world. I think, you and I need to put together some kind of certification course for docs or something like that to help promote really savvy practitioners to be able to serve the people that are listening to us. So it's not such a question mark. Where do I go and how do I get this care? Right.
Exactly. And we will talk about that further, you and I, as we have been for a couple of years. I'd love to get it happening, of course. Would you type into the chat also the name of the 2 products? And one woman in the chat asked, are they compatible with one another, these 2?
They're meant to be taken together.
Okay. Would you type their names into the...
receptor detox, and that's one. And then hormone balance and protect. So receptor detox, this has botanicals that have been shown by the scientists. So I worked at Tulane at the Center for Bioenvironmental Research, and the scientists got very deep into botanicals that work with hormones, so much so that we put on hormone conferences every year where scientists in the hormonal field would come and present their data. And the last few conferences sounded naturopathic and nutritional because hormones and nutrition are so intimately intermingled. So I learned many ways in which the receptor, that little satellite dish that's supposed to receive hormone, this is the basis of hormone health, receptor functionality. You don't get that by measuring levels. Right at the moment, doctors' hands are tied because what do? They can debate what they do, but they measure either blood or urine or 24-hour, and they say, oh, your hormones are fine. You don't need any. But we're functional medicine practitioners, so functional hormone health is receptor functionality. So this product cleans off the receptors with very specific botanicals that pull off chemicals that are known to block those receptors. And at the binding domain, there are multiple nutrients that need to be in the binding domain for hormones to work. Zinc pulls the hormone into the binding domain. Then you need iodine, magnesium, B6, pyridoxal 5-phosphate dictates the duration of the signal. So I put in exactly the amounts that make the binding domains work from working with the scientists who discovered all this. This keeps the receptors functional. And then in here, I have a very special formula that helps keep your hormones balanced throughout the day, enhances bioavailability so your body can use the hormones you're getting. Either your own hormones, you can take this for your own hormones, or if you're on prescribed hormones. And then I have the botanicals that have helped keep me in remission, growth controllers. So you don't have to worry in your brain, am I taking hormones or am I going to get a higher risk of cancer? So there's a very sophisticated, of the highest quality level botanicals. These are exactly the botanicals that I've been taking for almost 30 years to keep my remission, my mission. So this is based on science, but my own personal experience of not getting cancers back. I had multiple cancers when I was younger. So I don't know if that's helpful.
I want to take you in a different direction entirely.
Okay, great. Let's go to a different direction.
What do you
How
think?
do I get out of this?
What do you think that's really important that people do not know about hormones? Is there any subject you can think of?
Yes. So first of all, medicine evolved to have genres of medicine. So there's a gastroenterologist, there's a gerontologist, there is a rheumatologist, and it's crazy. All of your joints have receptors for hormones. If you take animals and overectomize them, you remove in a female animal the ovaries, and you track with MRIs their joint health, suddenly all their joints age. They get lipping, they get disc loss, because hormones rule joint health. And if they then give hormones back, they can slightly reverse the damage that was seen in the same in male animals. If you look at the gut has receptors entirely for gut health. I work a lot with inflammatory bowel disease patients in their 20s. And often they've been on birth control pills that block hormones going to their gut wall. It's a very big link in the science of birth control pills and inflammatory bowel disease in young women in their 20s. And if you give them back a little bit of hormones, yes, in their 20s, and help reboot their hormone health, often you, and a few other things, you can reverse inflammatory bowel disease. So you have receptors for hormones globally. Yet each of these separate areas of medicine don't look at hormones. So if you go to a gerontologist, they'll say, you know, there's no answer for dementia. Once you get dementia, it's, you know, we have some drugs that kind of, but we really don't. No one talks about hormones. And Bredesen is a neurologist from UCLA. He's written in peer-reviewed literature. He's trained over 2,000 physicians that have been replicating his work. showing a multi-tiered program for mild and moderate dementia, the first step is assessing hormones, because hormones give volume and function to the brain. But it's not standard of care, because gerontologists don't look at hormones. They say hormones are the role of gynecologists and urologists. They don't look at hormones. There's nowhere. Hormones are the forgotten rabbit hole of medicine, yet they are critical signaling molecules for these multiple systems. So you go to a gastroenterologist, they never look at hormones. They do not. I made a presentation at Austin Regional Gastroenterology because I had 7 patients that we shared. A bunch of them that were told they had to have their colon removed stat, a colectomy stat. They didn't have cancer, but they had multiple cellular changes and polyps and things. I gave them hormones and a protocol, and in 6 months follow-up, they had normal colonoscopies. I made a presentation to them. I said, let me talk to your gastroenterologist. So I showed them that I used hormones and that I used a number of other things nutritionally. And they leaned back and they said, boy, we had no idea all this was in peer review literature, but there's no way we would ever use hormones. Hormones are gynecologists, endocrinologists, we have everything separated, yet hormones influence all tissues. And therein lies an issue for really getting great care at the root cause level.
Yeah. How about hormones in the brain? You did mention, of course, dementia. How about estrogen receptor sites, estriol receptor sites in the human brain?
So your brain volume and function is so greatly dependent on hormones, and even your neurotransmitters that people go, well, I'm on an antidepressant to help me have more serotonin in my brain. They all follow hormone health. Hormones rule the brain. That's why I said my last book is called Sexy Brain, and it's all about the role of hormones in the brain and what this toxic environment is doing to our brains and to our genders. I said we're going to have a threat of environmental castration. And in fact, when I worked at the hormone think tank, our biggest topic of concern was gender bending. I remember back in the 90s, Lou Goulet, who was an embryologist at the University of Southern Florida, he really was one of the instrumental scientists to launch the field of endocrine disruption, because he caught alligators in the polluted Lake Apopka, which has now been remediated. He caught these alligators and showed that male alligators had smaller penises, and even some of them had ovaries and eggs, and the females were being masculinized and the males were being feminized. They remediated the pollution, and then that gender bending reversed. He unfortunately got lymphoma that his wife, who's an anthropologist, Elizabeth, feels was due to him hanging out in the polluted lake. But we were trying to raise money with Gore at that time to test chemicals that we're all exposed to. So he made a presentation to the House Senate Elect Committee, and he made a famous line that he's now will be known for, even though he's died, sadly. And that line was, he looked around the room and he said, no man in this room, every man in this room is half the man that his grandfather was. And what will our children be? Because we know there's a significant testosterone deficiency in younger and younger men that's not age dependent. We know young women are having less estrogen and more testosterone. There's an epidemic of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Our hormones are being all screwed up, especially because the egg and the sperm have a lot of fat. The placenta has a lot of fat. That's why these supplements are ideal before you even get pregnant or during a pregnancy. These are safe during pregnancy to try and keep your hormones working as healthfully as we can. But we live in a scenario where the planet is affecting our hormone signals, but none of our docs have been taught about hormones, let alone toxicity of the planet. It's kind of out of the mainstream. It's such a huge problem. There was a big forum put on by Harvard and the Huffington Post about the 3 major threats to humanity. And it was in January of a few years ago. In fact, if you want to listen to it, you can just put in Harvard and Huffington Post endocrine disrupting forum. It'll pop right up, the link for it. And many of the people on that forum were people I worked with at Tulane. And they said the 3 major threats to humanity, the first was nuclear war. We all know that. God forbid. The second was global warming. And the third was endocrine disruption. because of its effect on fertility and brain function. But yet that understanding of what a threat it is and how powerful hormones are hasn't gone into medicine. So when you go to see your doctor with issues, that isn't anywhere being evaluated. This is a new understanding. That's why it's great to have shows like this to discuss this isness that most physicians and patients aren't aware of, yet can be part of what their suffering is about.
Yeah. And, it isn't just the petrochemicals and the other toxic chemicals in our environment. It's also just the straight old birth control pills being flushed. Women who take birth control pills, they eventually pee out estrogen in the metabolites and progestins and their metabolites get into water supplies. The city of Montreal, for example, found very significantly increased estrogen amounts in the city water supply, gender bending. This is a huge topic when we're talking about the most powerful biochemicals in our body, hormones. They're capable of really the strongest types of effects that can take place in our body, and they're getting messed up.
We don't realize that our water treatment plants aren't designed to remove pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical metabolites, especially the ones from birth control pills and hormones. So men and women and boys and girls, you're being exposed in the shower. Remember, too, in my book, Hormone Deception, I show how to decrease these exposures because I go into this in detail. It's a must-read book. You can either get the book on my website or on Amazon. But this book took me 6 years to write in an era when nobody knew about endocrine disruption. And then I was invited to be at that think tank with the scientists who created the field and further the field, which is how I created these products. This is all based on science, yet it hasn't entered the clinical trenches yet. You ask your physician about this, they won't know. This isn't taught even in naturopathic schools at the moment.
And not to make it too complicated, what is essential for every single person is to become the captain of their own health. And anyone who starts investigating, well, how do I get healthier? You realize that you've got to get the best of nutrition, which comes down to eating organic. There are other important nutritional qualities so that you're not swallowing some of these toxic chemicals that have been put on the plants. And as Devaki was mentioning, you can clean up your own personal environment so that you get rid of the toxic chemicals that you don't even know are there. They're in your cleaning supplies. They're in your
biggest exposure is your shower. The biggest exposure by far. You stand under a shower for so many minutes, you get much more than drinking a few gallons a day. And there's lots and lots of potential carcinogens. If you put a Berkey, I have it on as a product in my website. You don't have to get it from me. I just wanted to make it easy to get a $50 Berkey shower filter, Berkey, replace it every 6 months, removes many of those chemicals. That's, for example, and I go into that in my book and show what are the places in your home that you and your loved ones are getting the biggest exposure, although these products help rinse them off your receptors. But the shower, we don't think of the shower. It's one of our biggest exposures in the home, even more than eating organic. It's crazy. And it's something you do every day.
Yeah, and the skin absorbs stuff like wonderfulness. The skin is one of the greatest.
That's why you put hormones on your skin with your products, with the jojoba oil. But everyone wants to be healthier longer, and we're really very, very ill. We had 1 million people die from COVID because our population is so ill and because pharmaceutical companies are so powerful. So I love that Seinfeld line. It's actually about something else, but where they go, master of your own domain. You have to become master of your own domain and have a team and a team of experts that you work with, but ultimately that you learn how to make these own decisions and learn how to protect yourself from your home up in your own life.
And that's the great news, is to get healthy, to address all these assaults on our health and to improve our health. 99% of what you need to do, you're going to be doing yourself, which means you really can be successful And as Deviki mentioned earlier, you don't want to beat yourself up and feel like you've got to get it all done in the next month. No, I like to take one step at a time. Let's see, what's the highest priority for my health this month?
Like the shower, getting a shower filter. If you could just do that, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. But one thing that gives hope. So when I wrote Hormone Deception, they were looking at Finnish organic farmers and looking at sperm motility and number, because they were using that as an endpoint of health. And they saw that all the farmers had to do was eat half of their diet as organic, and they had extremely healthy sperm, compared to farmers that ate none of their diet as organic and had much less healthy sperm. And I hang on that study. They only needed to clean up their diet 50%. You have 21 meals in a week. If you're not ill, this is if you're not battling for your life with stage 4 cancer or something like that, where you have to be much more extreme. If you're just looking to clean up your life with 21 meals in a week, if 10 of those meals you start eating much more sensibly, many more diverse vegetables, no processed foods, you're really on your way. It doesn't have to be 100%. And that takes some of the stress out of it. Perfection isn't a goal, just health is a goal. You don't have to be perfect to become healthy and achieve your goal.
Beautifully said. And
do you want me to be answering these questions?
Yes. Would you speak about, this is a question from a Facebook user, could you speak about vitamin D being a hormone instead of a vitamin and the two types of D?
It's not that it's a hormone instead of a vitamin. A vitamin is something your body needs but can't make, so that it fulfills that definition. But it also acts as a powerful signaling molecule that can enter the nucleus and send messages to the gene. That's what hormones do. They can enter the nucleus, they bind into the receptor, it shimmies in space. Vitamin B6, and yes, the form in my supplement is methylated. Vitamin B6 shimmies in space, and just if there's pyridoxal 5-phosphate around, it shimmies for the right amount of time, and it sends a message to the gene. That's the definition of a hormone. It can cross the membrane, it can bind to the receptor, it can send a message to the gene. That's genomic signaling. Vitamin D can also do genomic signaling. So that's all I'm going to say about that at the moment. But one thing I'd like to say is all hormones are a family. This is something that most, your gynecologist, your endocrinologist, for some reason, this is not yet taught in med school. I would love for David and I to be able to help change that. But all hormones are a family that function and dysfunction together. You talk about this a lot, where if you have adrenal issues, but you're low in sex steroid hormones because you're older, often if you prescribe hormone replacement, adrenal health will float up and improve because all the hormones are connected. So if you have issues with estrogen or testosterone, but you have thyroid or vitamin D issues that aren't addressed, you might not get the response you want because all the hormones influence each other. Why? Because because these receptors are so big, these nuclear receptors, they're promiscuous, they're slutty. They can swim in and out of each other. They can influence each other. So a savvy hormone doctor will try and get a sense of all your hormones to make sure there isn't a sick one in the background that's affecting why you can't get the benefit you want from the progesterone or estrogen. Hormones are somewhat complicated, but they're not taught or downloaded to physicians to help you with them in that way. I worked with a gentleman who discovered the first receptors. They said, this is receptor health. They used to say, why did doctors only just test levels? What the F is with that? Because they discovered the receptors, so there's more nuances, and a doc that will work with you well understands that, but it's a new body of information. One last thing, I don't mean to seem like a big mouth, but I am a little bit, sorry. Information is like moving the Titanic away from the icebergs. It takes so much time to get a concept that's factual to be reflected in the clinical trenches, how you might get a cogent answer from a doc. So just understand that. Don't be frustrated by that. It's an isness, but that's why it's so super that, for example, Dr. Rosensweet has shows like this where you can hear this such valuable information. Honestly, I would not be who I am today. Most of my colleagues don't get to enjoy their life with the energy that I do today because I have this information and can live with it. That's why I want to thank you again for having me on. This is so important.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, there is, no matter what the lag time is in medicine, and it's about 30 years still. I remember I was hired by the state of New Mexico in 1972, and I wrote a paper on nutrition. And a Dr. Kilmer McCulley had just discovered the relationship of B6 and homocysteine and was talking about its relationship to heart disease. And then 30 years later, I'm driving in Florida, and on National Public Radio, I hear this announcement that there's been a brand new discovery that homocysteine relates to heart disease. It's 30 years later, lag time. But to get practical about it, you can manage so much of your own health yourself. You can get knowledgeable enough to do the basics, to clean up your diet, to clean up what you're drinking.
Which is no small thing. It's no small thing to clean up your diet in your home. No small thing. Powerful.
There's a certain part that you're going to need technical support, and you want this. You got to go shopping. You need to ask around, call your local compounding pharmacist, talk to your women friends. You're looking for someone who's really knowledgeable, trained, and experienced in treating women in menopause and men in andropause.
In hormone deception, I help them learn how to shop with awareness. That's part of the last third of the book about how you do that and how you go to the environmental working site, and you can download that app. And when you're in a store, just take your phone and shine it on a product, and you can read if it's got endocrine disruptors or carcinogens at one fell little click.
And I was referring to the shop a woman and a man needs to do to find a professional that can get you through the technical issues of getting hormones right, because there's a lot to know there. There's a lot of moving parts, but it isn't a problem for someone who's really taken on the subject, really loves it, really interested in it, is getting the education, is getting the mentoring, is getting the training. We love this stuff. So your job is to find someone who really cares about how to deploy these hormones and how to individualize it for you, because there's such tremendous variation, woman to woman, man to man, that all we have to do is, that's not a problem. All we have to do is individualize it, and someone who's knowledgeable knows how to do that.
I want to answer one of these questions. That's a great question. Can I do that?
Please do, yes.
So one question says, will one test examine all those hormones to assess the balance? So first of all, you need to know that we don't even have a test right now that assesses all hormones, because we now know that you can make hormones, they can work locally and be degraded locally in your peripheral body. Like you make some hormones in your brain, you make progesterone in your brain, you make progesterone in your coronary artery, you can make estrogen in your fat cells. There is a lot more hormone activity than any hormone test can pick up. So any hormone test we have is a little bit like 5 blind men touching an elephant. At the moment, the 24-hour urine is one of the better tests, but it still doesn't test the whole hormonal picture. So I love what David Brownstein always says, is how do you feel? When your hormones work well, you think right, you sleep right, your energy is sustained throughout the day, you get muscle mass production after you work out, so your muscles respond. You don't have sarcopenia winning out on you. You have good digestion. You have 2 poops a day. The larger, I love the old saying, the larger the poop, the smaller the hospital. It's totally true. I have a lot of patients come in, they don't have great elimination. How you function, it sounds simplistic, but it is a reflection of your hormone health. Really how you feel and occupy your bodysuit is more to do than any sophisticated testing that we have at the moment. Though we do testing and we do go by it, but it's not, in my opinion, it might be different for you, David. I don't feel that testing is the end all be all.
Not at all. And, we can learn so much from just listening to the patient and asking some very pointed questions. We learn a tremendous amount. And then laboratory testing can be an assist It can be an adjunct, but it's the whole picture. There's so many ways to evaluate someone. So you want someone to be working with a professional who uses all of those ways. And just like you said, Devaki, it all begins with how's someone feeling, how are they eliminating, how are they thinking, how are they sleeping, these really core basic issues.
But you know what's so crazy to me is how much medicine doesn't address that. I have a patient recently who's had very severe gut pain for 15 years. Her husband told me she cried to sleep at night for every single night, and he was devastated. He said, if you could help my wife, it would be worth all the money in the world. And she, over the last so many years, she'd seen 5 gastroenterologists, and she was on a very expensive medication that was $300 a month to try and draw water into the bowel, which magnesium does, that nobody ever spoke to her about magnesium. Not one gastroenterologist ever talked to her about what she ate or how much she moved or what her levels of nutrients and hormones were like. She had been on birth control pills for 20 some years. Remember, birth control pills shut down your hormones, and you have hormones receptors all throughout your gut walls. So hormones are part of your hormone health. Women tend to have more irritable bowel syndrome and gut issues when they've been on birth control pills a long time. At Tulane, when we tested things for endocrine disrupting capabilities, one of our controls was ethinyl estradiol, the estrogen in birth control. So when we just address those things, I talked to her yesterday. She says she feels better than she's felt in 20 years. And it happened rapidly. But the doctors didn't ask these questions, and they threw antacids at her, and she actually had a bacterial infection that blocks her own acid production, so she got much worse when she went on the antacids. So it's a little bit difficult because docs are working on one level to help you out, but their hands are tied because they haven't been trained to look at your lifestyle, your food, your exposures, your hormones, to figure out how those play a role in your health. Thus, you need to find information like that from, look at all the work you go through to put this podcast on. So for people to get exposed to this information of things they can start taking charge of themselves. You're still going strong. What gives you the drive and the health to I don't know how old you are, but it's a little bit older than me, and you're an oldie but goodie like me.
I'm 80.
You're 80. So you look phenomenal. You're going strong. Most people in 80 are like already in a nursing, they're in a home. What makes you you? And why are you doing what you're doing?
50 years of addressing everything that was important to living, including my own emotions and my own consciousness. I put a tremendous amount of time and energy and my finances into healing what I came to Earth with, as far as uncomfortable feelings and unbeneficial thoughts. Getting the information and tools to deal with your emotions in your mind, and thus arriving deeper into who we are, who we really are, and life itself. Lining up with life itself is the core of what I've done. I got fascinated by nutrition.
What do you mean lining up with life itself? What does that mean?
Well, there's 2 possibilities. One is that we're embodied in I am, the deepest, truest parts of ourselves that are governed by our heart and our soul and what's real for us. And in doing so, we get connected directly to the divine and to life itself, and our lives unfold because we're part of creation. That's one way to introduce that. Or there's an option. We can have so many unbeneficial thoughts and perceptions and emotions, and we're making decisions out of these uncomfortable, undealt with emotions, that we make choices in relationships, in jobs, in what we eat, how well we treat ourselves, that we're living something other than who we really are. We all look the same, but we could choose a relationship for wrong reasons and be tremendously stressed by it. We could choose food for wrong reasons, that we're not sensitive enough to know that the Big Macs, they have some certain appeal to us, but they don't feel right to us, and there's something feels wrong about it. Or someone who's really sensitive to their body is going to choose foods that are really nurturing, So it's a big topic, but it all comes down to the amount of information and tools and support we have to deal with our emotions and our mind, and thus improve our lives, our living. So we get to have things like fun, and we get to have friends and meaningful relationships and connections and love. I know that's a pretty broad stroke there, but
I think what I hear you saying is that awareness opens the door. And the wise person is always open to that which they do not know. They don't think they know everything. I'm always so pushed away by somebody who acts like they know it all, because then I know they're shut down and I can hardly believe anything they say. So I think you're talking about the personal journey of awareness, and that as we become more aware, we can go deeper into our lives, into the way that it looks like we want to go. But awareness is everything. And if we just act on that which we're told to believe by our doctors, by our society, by our mother and father, and our culture, we're just living. In fact, I love the line from Carolyn Meese, who's a great spiritual teacher. She says, our biggest addictions aren't alcohol and drugs, they're perceptions that we inherit from others. And that comes down to estrogen driving breast cancer, just a perception we're inheriting. We're taking this wrong perception that even our doctors think is wrong. So that's awareness opens you up to that which is more factual and true for you. But you have to unvelcro to the inherited potential perceptions that society and doctors and other people give you, because we're told to lean on our experts so much. And now we discover that our experts aren't always right. What's even the concept of experthood? Why are they even listening to us? But I love the idea of awareness, of opening awareness.
We're walking into an ocean of information and possibility here. And I think for today, I know our time is up. And gee, Devaki, what a privilege to have you on. And, I know our audience will call for a return of you, as I do. So periodically, I'd love to do this with you.
How often do you have this show?
Well, we have a once a week show, Facebook Live. Yeah. But you have an open invite here, and we can go through this in many ways. And I want to thank you again for being here. And I urge people to avail themselves of the tremendous amount of information and practical tools you have, including even the supplements that can relate to receptor sites. And once again,
thank you for being in my life, David. You've done so much for me, from when I had breast cancer 30 years ago to ending up now being in the same space of hormones and education and being a dear friend. You've become from a doctor of mine to a colleague and a friend of mine, because you're an extraordinary human being. So thank you for being you and for allowing me to come on and share all this lifelong work I've bumped into.
So
I love you. I really love you.
And we'll see you all later. We'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Blessings. Blessings.